Hey guys, tonight we're traveling back to a place where gold mosaics sparkle overhead. Incense hangs thick in the marble corridors, and your life, oddly enough, depends on getting breakfast just right. Imagine it. You're jolted awake not by a gentle sunrise or chirping birds, but by the sharp clang of monastery bells mixed with the distant, blood-curdling scream of someone who probably flunked the wine temperature. Welcome to the Byzantine Palace, Constantinople, 10th century. You're a eunuch. And not just any eunuch, you're the unfortunate soul in charge of the emperor's breakfast. You shuffle up from your straw-stuffed mattress, spine aching from the cold stone floor and the stiff wooden board they call a bed frame. Your feet touch the icy tile, and, oh no, you forgot your slippers. Again. The only thing colder than the floor is the air you breathe, thick with smoke from half-extinguished oil lamps and the faint tang of vinegar from last night's failed pickling experiment. And before your eyes are fully open, there it is, your first minor humiliation of the day. The chamber pot has been knocked over in the night. You, master of morning meals for the most powerful man on earth, are now ankle-deep in last night's tea. Not exactly how power breakfast began in modern times, so before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, post your location and local time in the comments. I love seeing where everyone's listening from. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You grab your ceremonial belt embroidered with tiny embroidered fish, for reasons no one understands, and stagger toward the corridor. The palace is already alive with whispers and footsteps. 1,000 people are awake, but none of them want to be seen yet. Not by you, not by each other. There's something almost medieval espionage about the early hours. Everyone's creeping around, like someone just got poisoned. Again, you pass a trio of guards who don't acknowledge you. They don't have to. They're not paid to blink at breakfast eunuchs. You nod anyway, partly out of habit and partly because their spears still have yesterday's pigeon feathers stuck on them. And it's weirdly funny at this hour. You roll. Might sound noble imperial steward, morning majordomo, sacred guardian of sacred bread, but the reality feels closer to janitor, goat wrangler, and fall guy all rolled into one. You don't make the emperor's breakfast. That's beneath your station. But you oversee every detail of it. Which means that if a single pistachio is out of place, you're the one whose reputation ends up in the compost pile. Along with yesterday's octopus jelly, you reach the outer ring of the Byzantine Palace complex, just as the sun threatens to rise. Not that it matters inside the kitchens. It's perpetually smoky, steamy, and dim. The air is scented with cardamom and old regret. Your slippers squelch slightly as you walk. Still wet, lovely. Along the way, you make a mental checklist. You need to confirm the saffron hasn't been watered down, that the ceremonial pomegranate hasn't bruised, and that the imperial porridge bears the correct golden stamp. Yes, the emperor insists on a monogrammed grain dish. Historians still argue whether this originated as a genuine symbol of divinity or just a weird flex. Still, you were lucky to get this job. Not all eunuchs make it this far. Many are shuttled off to dusty monasteries, silent scriptoria, or terrifyingly loud eunuch choirs. Breakfast, for all its dangers, at least keeps you near power. And sometimes near pastries. But being near power means you're near the people who kill for it too. Just last week, one of your fellow attendants, Crispus, the guy who always smelled faintly of basil, got reassigned after the emperor accused him of serving overtly warm honey. He's now somewhere in the Anatolian countryside, copying religious texts by candlelight, and probably crying into his barley stew. Your fingers tremble slightly as you light a ceremonial taper, one of 50 used to bless the morning rations. It's all part of the sacred nonsense. The emperor believes his breakfast must be spiritually sound, which is ironic, considering the last time he ate chickpeas. He cursed the heavens and 3 local saints for the resulting digested drama. You catch a glimpse of yourself in a polished bronze shield mounted on the wall. Your robe is straight, your hair cap's in place, and your face is as blankly humble as required. You look like someone who's never had an opinion. Perfect doc by the time you pass through the third antechamber where the bread is prayed over by a minor deacon and a very sleepy goose. The palace is beginning to stir for real. You hear music from the hypostyle hall. A flute. That's usually a good sign. When they use drums, it means the emperor's in a crucify someone before. Lunch mood . And just then, you pause. Because there it is, the thing you dread most. A faint, unmistakable clatter from behind a nearby curtain. The sound of the breakfast inspector's sandals. Yes, they have one. His name is Theoctistos, and he wears robes so stiff with starch they could probably stand up without him. He believes in 3 things: order, celery, and the complete obliteration of his rivals, including you. He steps out from behind the curtain like a bad thought. Well, he hisses. Let's see if your barley counts as unblemished today. You smile your court smile. The one you learned at age 8, right after your surgery. Yeah, we're not going into that tonight. Too grim. And you nod. Of course, your pungency, you whisper. Not his real title, but it fits. Because this is your morning now. You are a eunuch in the Byzantine court. You are in charge of the emperor's breakfast. And you probably won't survive this. You've survived the first gauntlet of the morning waking up, dodging Theoctistos, and making it past 3 different holy food blessings without tripping on your robe. But now comes the real trial. Navigating the kitchen labyrinth. C. Most people picture palace kitchens as one big, bustling room. Not in Byzantium. No. The imperial kitchens of Constantinople sprawl like an underground city. Dozens of vaulted chambers, narrow smoke-choked corridors, and stairwells that seem to lead nowhere or worse, directly into the meat cellar, where last year's sausages are rumored to have achieved SENTIENCE. To get from your quarters to the breakfast prep area, you have to pass through 27 doors. You've counted. Each has a different key. Of course, you don't have any keys. Those are held by the master of locks, a moody eunuch named Photius, who insists on waking up at precisely the second crow's call, which today came 20 minutes late because someone fed the palace rooster fermented raisins. So you wait. Again. The porridge is steaming in its cauldron behind the last door, but you're locked out, chatting awkwardly with a marmalade-stained page boy who clearly resents your existence. Nice belt, he mutters. You ignore him. Finally, Photios appears, bleary-eyed, muttering about horoscopes and Mercury retrograde. He unlocks the door with a sigh that sounds like betrayal, and you descend into the underbelly of the Blashany. Kitchens. This place is something else. It's hot. It's loud. It smells like smoked trout, melted beeswax, and despair. Greasy light filters through tiny slits in the stone walls, casting the cooks in an otherworldly glow like angry saints covered in flour. You tiptoe past the egg room, where a rotund monk is performing a ritual involving incense and a goose feather over a single golden yolk. Historians still argue whether this was an actual religious rite or just an overzealous superstition born from too many egg-related accidents. Either way, you don't interrupt. Further in, you pass the saucery, a vaulted chamber where 4 spice masters are arguing over the legitimacy of cinnamon imported through Persian traders. One of them sees you, rolls his eyes, and shouts, "The eunuch's back. Hide the good pepper." Quirky tidbit of the day? In the Byzantine court, the good pepper was literally locked in a box. Only 3 people had access: the emperor, the head sommelier, and supposedly you. But last time you tried to check the inventory, You found a lizard sleeping inside the pepper chest. So? Probably not as secure as they say. You press forward, dodging a stack of brass pans, a junior baker sprinting with a flaming ladle, and another rogue vinegar barrel rolling straight at your shins. You jump just in time, landing beside a wheel of cheese roughly the size of a human torso. No idea whose job it is to move it, but it's sweating in the heat. Just like you. The heart of the labyrinth is the main hearth, a towering dome where massive pots of soup, stew, and mysterious porridge rotate slowly on a circular gear system operated by 3 eunuchs and a small donkey. That's not a joke. The donkey's name is Basil, and he's technically outranked you. He wears a little hat. Here, you're greeted by the head cook, Domna, a terrifying woman with forearms like tree trunks and a voice that could curdle milk. She never smiles, ever. Some say she was once married to a Bulgarian general who disappeared mysteriously after criticizing her lentil fritters. "Where's your barley?" she growls. In the hallway, you reply, knowing full well that if the barley has been stolen, replaced, or mildly bruised, it'll be your funeral pyre this afternoon. Domna grunts and disappears into the dark. You glance at the fire-spit 2 suckling pigs rotate slowly, even though it's a fast day. You're not supposed to be roasting pigs, but it's the emperor. He fasts when it's politically useful. A side door creaks open, and you're nearly bowled over by a goat. It leaps over a basin of pickled onions and disappears into the herbs room. No one chases it. That goat lives here now. You finally reach the imperial preparation station, a gilded table near the back wall. It's where you will oversee the final arrangement of the emperor's tray. Gold-leaf porridge bowl, toasted fig bread, possibly, a single poached quail egg, and a goblet of pomegranate juice stirred 13 times clockwise. Any more and it's tasteless. Any less and suspiciously heretical. You whisper instructions to the serving eunuch beside you. Young, pale, twitchy. He's new. He flinches when you mention the silver spoon polish. Not a good sign. But you're out of time. From somewhere above, a bell tolls 6 times. Morning service has begun. You have exactly 28 minutes to complete the imperial breakfast. Carry it across the palace, up the winding eastern stairwell, and into the Chrysotriclinos, the golden hall, before the emperor emerges from prayer, still glowing with incense. I'm probably judging your toast alignment. And let's not forget the croissants. They're not called that, of course. But there's a twisted crescent-shaped pastry on the tray, dusted with crushed almonds and rosewater, that you've never seen anyone eat. Rumor has it it's there to symbolize the emperor's recent victory over Arab fleets. Historians still argue whether it was an actual battle or just a tense pastry negotiation. You lift the tray. It weighs more than expected. The goblet sloshes. The egg wobbles. Domna watches you with that look that says, "Drop it and die." Basil the donkey brays dramatically. You mutter a prayer to Saint Simeon the Stylite. He spent 40 years on top of a pillar, which still sounds better than doing this for a living. And you begin your ascent, one slippery marble step at a time, into the jaws of an imperial breakfast delivery. The tray shakes in your hands as you make your way up the eastern stairwell, an absurdly long, drafty spiral with enough steps to make your calves write letters of complaint. At some point, you pass a fresco of Saint Theodore slaying a dragon, and you can't help but feel jealous. He got to fight monsters with a sword. You're trying to keep pomegranate juice from sloshing onto the emperor's embroidered tablecloth. The stairs open into a cool corridor lined with golden mosaics and suspicious silence. You tread lightly, focusing on the tray. Quail egg, still intact. Crescent pastry, still unsmelled. Porridge golden, steaming, infused with precisely 7 grains. And at the center of it all, the cup, the emperor's goblet, carved from rock. Crystal, inlaid with pearls, allegedly once owned by Alexander the Great. The emperor believes it gives him visions. You believe it gives you ulcers. Your destination looms ahead. The Chrysotriclinos, the famed Golden Hall, where sunbeams bounce off every surface and the throne sits under a golden dome, guarded by mechanical lions. Yes, lions. Historians debate whether they were actually mechanical or just cleverly trained. All you know is they roar when they're wound up, and one of them once sneezed boiling oil on a diplomat from Venice. You don't even get to go all the way in. There's a small hidden door in the wall that leads to the side chamber of presentation. Modest marble niche where you will leave the tray, ring a silver bell, and back away like you're defusing an explosive. You set the tray down, carefully, reverently, like it's a holy relic, which politically speaking it is. You ring the bell. The soft, clear chime echoes through the corridor like a warning. Now comes the hardest part. You wait. The door creaks. A hand appears, a veined, bony thing wrapped in a sleeve of imperial silk, and retrieves the tray without a word. You bow. You stay bowed until the door clicks shut. Only then do you exhale. That breakfast, that single tray of symbolic, sanctified nonsense, will now be consumed or sniffed at, or discarded by the most powerful man in the world. A man who believes himself appointed by God, descended from Constantine, and more important than bread. And if the juice is sour, or the porridge lukewarm, or the crescent looks a little too Ottoman, your name might end up on a scroll. The bad kind. See, the emperor doesn't dine alone. Not really. Behind the curtain sit a dozen advisors, chamberlains, bishops, and one terrifying grandmother whose eyebrows are sharper than daggers. They'll all observe the breakfast. They'll whisper. And if anything goes wrong, if the egg jiggles in a way that reminds someone of a bad omen, you'll be blamed. Whether it was your fault or not, because you, poor eunuch, are the imperial food interface. A sacred buffer zone between the godlike ruler and his daily lentils. You're not allowed to eat in his presence, speak to him directly, or suggest substitutions. But you are expected to sense his moods through the seasoning. And if you're wondering, yes, sometimes he tests you. 1 week, he demanded a new spice. Blend every day, and claimed each one reminded him of a different saint's martyrdom. You had to commission a special curry paste from Antioch, just to avoid being accused of heresy or oregano. Another time, he declared that only foods that naturally face east could be served on Tuesdays. You don't even know what that means. But you served him a flatbread shaped like the Hagia Sophia, and that seemed to placate him. Breakfast isn't just food. It's ritual, it's politics, it's diplomacy. Remember the morning he dined with an ambassador from the Abbasid Caliphate? You had to organize a tray that honored both Christian fasting rules and Islamic halal customs. You ended up serving honeyed squash, stuffed dates, and a goat milk custard that curdled during the presentation. The emperor called it a metaphor for Eastern politics. Everyone clapped. You nearly fainted. Historians still argue whether the custard curdled because of improper heating or divine commentary. You just remember the look on Domna's face. You haven't made custard since. You turn away from the door and start walking back through the corridor, past gleaming icons and archways that all seem to whisper, "Not good enough." Every morning feels like a trial. You don't get feedback. If you don't hear a summons by noon, you assume you're safe for another day. But the silence is always heavy. Sometimes you wonder what the emperor really thinks of your work. You've only seen him up close twice. Once at a feast when you carried a flaming plum pudding. Yes, that happened. And once in the baths where you averted your eyes so hard you almost walked into a pillar. Still, the emperor knows your name. He must. There's a roster of those entrusted with sacred nourishment, and your name is 6th from the top. That's either good or terrible. Probably both dot as you head back through the side holes. You pass a younger eunuch carrying a tray of spiced wine. He nods at you. His hands tremble. You remember that phase when the fear is still sharp. You don't tell him it never really dulls. Not completely. You return to the kitchen labyrinth. The heat, the noise, the smells, everything hits you like a hammer. Domna is shouting about raisins again. Basil the donkey is chewing on a recipe scroll. Someone's dropped a whole tray of pickled plums and is now weeping softly. You glance at the empty spice chest and notice that good pepper is missing again. You'll have to write a report. You side out your duties for the morning are done for now. But you know it's not over. Soon, there will be judgment. A letter. A look. A sudden transfer to somewhere very far from porridge. You've seen it happen, so. You grab a hunk of fig bread and sit on an overturned bucket near the hearth. The stone warms your back. Your fingers smell like saffron. For a moment, you let your eyes close. Tomorrow, you'll do it all again, and pray the emperor doesn't. Decide that breakfast needs change. You barely have time to finish chewing your stolen fig bread when the door slams open and in storms the cook staff liaison officer, a glorified tattletale in a velvet sash who looks perpetually constipated with power. There's been a complaint, he says. No greeting, no explanation. Just those 4 chilling words. Your stomach drops. You quickly mentally scan the tray egg. Stable. Juice. Stirred. Porridge. Possibly too thick, but you added the basil oil. Unless Theoctisto's sabotaged it again. He's been looking twitchier than usual. And last week, he made a cryptic comment about the cinnamon reckoning. You follow the officer down a side corridor, through a hallway of frescoes depicting scenes from the Book of Genesis. Though, someone's added what appears to be a very bored-looking sausage to the Garden of Eden panel. Probably a kitchen prank. You'd laugh if your career weren't hanging by a barley thread. You're brought to the confectionery wing, which is exactly as whimsical as it sounds until you realize how much sugar costs in the empire. This is a place where mistakes get expensive fast. And here comes one now. Domna, arms crossed, lips thinner than a Byzantine tax exemption. The egg was tepid, she snarls, and the emperor noticed. You want to tell her the emperor once declared a loaf of rye bread possessed by Hades, but you hold your tongue. Instead, you bow low and say something humble about morning drafts and unpredictable goose burners. The cook staff liaison officer scribbles something, probably unconvincing grovel. But what stings worse than the reprimand is the reaction from the kitchen crew. They're smiling. See, while you technically outrank every single cook in the palace kitchen, Domna included. That's just on parchment. In reality, they see you as an intruder, a eunuch whose authority is paper thin and usually smeared with egg yolk. They don't like you. They never have. They say you haven't earned the pan. That's a real saying down here. Earning the pan. It means surviving 2 years of kitchen service without losing your eyebrows, your temper, or your spleen. You, of course, bypassed that via the Imperial Eunuch School, yes. That's a thing, and we're fast-tracked, straight, into ceremonial food service because of your handwriting and uncanny ability to tell saffron from turmeric by smell alone. But cooks don't care about script or sniffing skills. They care about sweat, fire, burn marks. You showed up with soft hands and a belt embroidered with sacred geese. And they really haven't forgiven you for the egg tart incident. Here's what happened. 3 months ago, you recommended a dessert you'd read about in a foreign recipe. Scroll. Custard in a crisp pastry shell, touched with honey and rosewater. You thought it would wow the emperor. It did not. The tart arrived slightly overbaked and gave off an aroma that reminded the patriarch of Jerusalem's funeral rites. The emperor claimed it stirred a dark memory from his childhood. You were almost exiled. Doma had to step in personally and take the blame, something she's never forgotten. Since then, every time you enter the kitchens, the clatter of utensils pauses just long enough for you to feel it. The hostility. You're the outsider with the imperial clipboard. The soft-spoken eunuch who can recite ceremonial pouring rites but has never deboned a sturgeon. They call you names, none of them flattering. Little porridge prince. The spoon whisperer. That bland fellow. Today's insult is fresh dot. As you pass a row of baking apprentices, one whispers that to not let him near the pies, they'll turn existential. That one almost makes you laugh. Almost. But you press on, because your job isn't about being liked. It's about managing this cranky culinary circus and making sure no one poisons the emperor or sets fire to the holy syrup reserve. Which reminds you, the syrup barrel is missing again. You corner one of the cellar stewards, who looks immediately guilty. What happened to the barrel of cedar honey syrup? Traded it, he mumbles. For what? He shifts. A peacock. You blink. Live peacock? No, he says, a bit too quickly. Well, not anymore. Peacocks, for the record, were sometimes served in high court banquets roasted, refeathered, and made to look alive, because Byzantines had zero chill when it came to food presentation. Still, syrup for bird is a deeply questionable exchange. You make a note to report it, but not before pocketing a small jar of clove jelly as hush compensation. You're not proud, but you haven't had dessert in days. The rest of the morning is a blur of minor disasters. Someone dropped the holy salt in the brazier again. The fig spread tastes vaguely of lamp oil. The parrot that lives above the spice room has started shouting heresy at random, especially whenever Domna speaks. And through it all, the cooks continue their cold war. They move your spoons. They misplace the ceremonial ladle. One even placed a fake spider made from turnip shavings on your seat. You didn't scream, but you did fall over. That memory will haunt you forever. You wish you could earn their respect. You do try. Last week, you peeled 17 boiled eggs in under 6 minutes. They applauded until they realized you'd forgotten to remove the inner membranes. They laughed until someone almost inhaled a pistachio dot at one point. You suggest a new stew based on an old Cappadocian recipe. Domna sighs so hard the fire flickers. We undo peasant chic, she mutters. You nod. You swallow your pride with a side of pickled onion. You may outrank them, but down here in the kitchens, you'll always be the breakfast eunuch neither. Cook nor noble, just someone in between. Too holy for filth, too lowly for fame. Someone to blame when the yoke breaks. And tomorrow, it all begins again, unless someone finds out about the syrup. You don't breathe normally again until you're back in the quiet hallway behind the east kitchens, pressing your palm against a cool marble column just to ground yourself. Your fingers are sticky with plum reduction, your dignity slightly burned around the edges, and someone's drawn a mustache on your reflection in the polished copper water basin. But no time to wallow. You have a new battlefield to enter, the morning etiquette circuit, because while food may rule the emperor's stomach, etiquette controls the court's soul, or at least its sphincter-tightening anxiety levels. Everything, and we mean everything, has a rule, a ritual, a correct spoon, foot angle, scent, rope, pleat. And in your role as protos nothites of the morning meal, you're still not sure what that translates to. You are now required to stand in silent attendance as breakfast is digested. Politically, you make your way toward the morning assembly atrium, clutching your seal-tied scroll of approved post-meal greetings. It's a sad thing, this scroll. It contains exactly 3 sentences you're allowed to say in response to the emperor's post-breakfast commentary. May your strength reflect the purity of this morning's grains. The blessed fig, like your rain, endures. Peace. Upon your digestion, O pillar of civilization. That's it. No ad-libbing. No follow-ups. One eunuch once tried to add, and your beard looks excellent today, and was reassigned to stable mop duty in Armenia. You glide into the atrium. It's huge, cold, and smells faintly of lemon wax and damp silk. Marble columns flank the center. And already, the other eunuchs are forming into their required morning poses. Left foot forward, eyes modestly down, mouth alert but humble. You assume that means something between about to sneeze and just found a silver coin. And there, in the center, is the etiquette master, stylus in hand, squinting at everyone's posture. He walks with a limp and a cane made from the shin bone of a revered scribe. You try not to think about that too hard. Your sleeves, he whispers, passing you. They wrinkle at the elbow. Unacceptable. You bow slightly. I'll starch them with my tears, master. He doesn't laugh. He never laughs. Rumor is his last smile occurred during the iconoclasm. Historians still debate whether it was. In support or horror. Now comes the post-breakfast procession, where various court officials, eunuchs, and ceremonial towel holders shuffle through the corridor outside the emperor's private chambers in absolute silence. The idea is to create a soft wall of reverence between the emperor and the sound of his own digestion. You participate by holding a tiny bronze bell. You are to ring it once if the emperor steps out early, twice if he belches, and never if you value your career. It's a cruel little bell, this thing. Last year, it betrayed your colleague, dropping from his sleeve and ringing mid-procession. He now transcribes fish inventories at a monastery near the Black Sea. As you stand, still and silent, your feet begin to cramp. Your spine itches. You think about your old dream, to be a mosaic artist. You were good once. You made a pigeon out of colored wax that was so realistic it tricked a real pigeon into attacking it. But then came the palace exam, the eunuch selection, the sacrifice, and now you hold a bell and pray for no digestive feedback. The emperor finally exits his chambers. Everyone bows in perfect synchrony. His robes are luminous, his face unreadable. You risk a glance and immediately regret it. Today, he's wearing the morning crown, the one with tiny dangling chains of rubies that sway hypnotically when he walks. They make you seasick. He pauses, looks toward you. Your throat tightens. Who oversaw the barley today? He asks aloud, his voice soft but dangerous, like silk wrapped around a scorpion. You bow so low your nose brushes your knees. I did. Radiance. A beat of silence. Acceptable. It tasted like duty. You don't even know what that means, but you nod, as if you've just been blessed with divine revelation. Everyone murmurs softly, "Glory be," and the emperor moves on. The etiquette master exhales loudly, dramatically, like someone narrowly avoiding death by spoon. He used a metaphor, he whispers. Mark it down. You've passed this round. But etiquette isn't just about survival. It's about never slipping. Because one wrong move, one robe brushed out of alignment, and you'll be the morning's entertainment. Just last month, a visiting dignitary from Trebizond accidentally addressed the emperor as your plumpness instead of your plenitude. To be fair, the emperor had been very into honeyed chestnuts that week. He now lives in quiet shame, tending grapevines on an island no one can pronounce. You've memorized more ceremonial greetings than you know recipes. You've practiced 30 ways to bow, 15 styles of eye contact, and 7 variations of humble laughter. You once spent a full week learning how to smile in the throat, a bizarre technique for expressing reverence without showing teeth. Apparently, teeth are common. And you've learned that every moment in court etiquette is a trap disguised as decorum. You aren't allowed to cough, sneeze, or blink aggressively. You must always fold your hands like a weary angel. You may not adjust your belt in public, though no one has told the head treasurer, who adjusts it with the fury of a blacksmith. And heaven forbid you yawn. Yawning implies boredom, or worse, fatigue. Only the emperor is allowed to look tired. One time, you scratched your nose during a hymn. The result? A 5-day silent treatment from the etiquette circle and a very stern talk about facial integrity. So, here you are, a eunuch, not allowed to dine, speak, sit, or blink incorrectly, charged with delivering perfection on a golden tray, while standing perfectly still and spiritually deodorized. You are both invisible and omnipresent, and no one, not even the cooks, not even the emperor, has more chances to fail with such spectacular flair. The procession ends. You return to your corridor, your breath finally steady, and remove the bell from your sleeve with slow reverence. One tiny clink, and your heart skips. It's just a chain. You exhale. You survived etiquette. Today, but tomorrow there's a bishop's breakfast. And bishops are the worst. You retreat to your quarters to recover from the morning's etiquette gauntlet, moving stiffly down the corridor like a noble statue reluctantly learning how to walk. At this point, even your earlobes are tired. Your legs ache from standing. Your back is sore from bowing, and your soul feels lightly toasted. Your chamber is generously a glorified storage closet tucked behind the scriptorium annex. Officially, it's called a reverend rest alcove. Unofficially, it's smaller than the emperor's bathtub and smells like damp vellum, old incense, and onion jam, which, coincidentally, is what you had for lunch 3 days ago. The room has a cot, a shelf, a small window that looks directly onto a brick wall. If you press your face up against it just right, you can see a slice of the sky between the eaves. This is your only connection to the outside world most days. You sit down slowly, trying not to knock over your most prized possession, a tiny carved ivory lion you won in a bet with another eunuch, who swore he could tell the difference between 2 brands of lamp oil by taste. He could not. His tongue still hasn't forgiven him. This is your life when you're not supervising breakfasts, dodging etiquette infractions, or fending off kitchen grudges. You live alone, eat alone, sleep alone, and not just because of the size of the room. Being a eunuch in the Byzantine court means you are trusted, exalted, and permanently othered. You are pure enough to serve the emperor's food, enter the women's quarters, handle sacred relics, but also just impure enough to be never fully accepted by anyone. You are not a man, not a woman, not a monk, not a noble. You're a peculiar third thing. A soft-voiced, smooth-cheeked bureaucratic cipher who exists in the cracks of power. People talk to you, but they don't talk to you. They'll ask you to carry a scroll to the bishop. They'll ask you to settle a stew dispute in the kitchen. They'll ask you what the emperor's mood was like after breakfast. Your answer: viscous. But they won't ask you what you think, or feel, or fear. Your closest friend is a parrot, and not even a particularly nice one. His name is Clytus, and he lives 2 doors down in the herb-drying alcove. No one remembers how he got here. He might have once belonged to a merchant or a disgraced bishop, but he stayed because he knows how to mimic the patriarch's sneeze perfectly, and the emperor thinks that's hilarious. You sometimes sneak him pieces of sesame bread. In return, he calls you milady. You stopped correcting him. Once, you tried confiding in one of the other breakfast eunuchs, a nervous young thing named Lazaros with eyebrows that never quite stopped moving. You mentioned feeling a bit out of place. He looked at you like you'd just admitted to murdering a saint and said, "We're not supposed to feel, you know. It clogs the duties." Right. Clogged duties. Can't have that. So instead, you write little poems, mostly short observations. Sometimes whole breakfast menus composed as elegies. You hide them in a scroll case beneath your mattress, wrapped in a piece of ceremonial napkin you accidentally stole during Lent. Your favorite begins, O fig of dawn, whose seeds recall the peppered sting of courtly crawl. It's not good, but it's yours. Occasionally, you fantasize about running away, joining a caravan, becoming a spice merchant in Trebizond or a rooftop gardener in Thessaloniki. But then you remember that you wouldn't last a week. Out there, you're still a eunuch, still marked. Still weird. In here, at least. You're important. Sort of. You're allowed into rooms others aren't. You carry sacred food. You read the emperor's breakfast dreams and interpret his seasonal toast cravings. You once touched the chalice of St. John Chrysostom with a sterilized linen glove. That means something, doesn't it? Still, there are days like this one when the walls press in just a little tighter, when the scrolls feel heavier, when the parrot ignores you, when your breakfast didn't get praised, but it didn't get you executed either. And somehow that middle ground feels emptier than either extreme. You lie back on your cot, staring at the ceiling, which is exactly 3 spiderwebs and one long crack shaped like Anatolia. You once pretended it was a map and gave names to the tiny spiders. General Nicetas fell in the Battle of Broome. May he rest in peace. You're drifting when you hear the whisper through the crack in the door. Hey, you up? It's Stephanus, another eunuch, rank 4. He's the one who smells faintly of rose vinegar and always has chalk under his nails. You sit up. Barely. Imperial stomach reports. We're summoned, of course. The daily briefing. You sigh and stand, tucking your robe. Before you leave, you glance at your lion carving, as if it might offer you a blessing. It remains stoically uninterested. You close the door gently behind you. Another corridor. Another scroll. Another round of silent, simmering expectations. Because while you might not have a real social life, you do have one sacred duty. Making sure the most powerful stomach in the empire runs like a blessed clock. And if that's not enough to fill your spiritual bowl, well, at least the parrot thinks you're a lady. You follow Stephanus down the corridor toward the secular digestorium, the name nobody uses, but that's printed in florid script above the door. Everyone else just calls it breakfast briefings with the devil. It's not the emperor you'll be dealing with. No, he's off in his prayer chamber or composing poetry about swords again. This meeting is with the real villains, mid-tier bureaucrats. Specifically, the 5 men who track and comment on every imperial bodily function, and 2 bishops who believe the digestive process is a form of divine prophecy. The room is damp. Not metaphorically, literally. You think the ceiling leaks. Or maybe the walls sweat. Hard to say. The table's warped from steam damage, and every chair is exactly 1 inch too low to be comfortable. Stephanus and you take your assigned places. Near the edge. Eunuchs aren't supposed to center the conversation. Just absorb and reflect. Divine gustatory insight. Or, in plain language, sit there and don't interrupt while important people discuss whether the emperor's lentils caused his mood swing. The other officials filter in scroll bearers, scribes, a guy with a gold-rimmed bladder chart. They carry tiny notebooks and expressions like they've smelled something faintly disappointing. Everyone has an opinion about breakfast. None of them have ever cooked anything in their lives. And then he arrives. Simeon, the Palatine secretary, also known as the Devil in Purple. Not because of his robes, though yes, they are aggressively plum, but because he never forgets an error, never forgives an embarrassment, and never ever raises his voice. His disapproval is subtler, more like dry rot, or mold in a tapestry. Let's begin, he says, not looking at anyone directly. The emperor made 2 remarks. Stephanus stiffens. You subtly tighten your posture. This is where careers die. First, The barley porridge tasted slightly forward. Interpretations? There's a flurry of rustling parchment. One scribe clears his throat. Possibly excessive cardamom? Unlikely, says another. I suspect an underblending of basil extract. Perhaps the pestle was. Simeon raises one finger. Silence. Then, slowly. Does the porridge team care to comment? Your heart thuds. You're the porridge team. You and a goat that doesn't like stairs. You speak carefully. We use the regular proportions. However, the humidity from the spice vault may have excuses, Simeon says gently, like he's complimenting your shoes. We deal in results. You nod. Of course. Absolutely. Results are sacred. You'll personally throttle the basil if it happens again. Second, he continues, the emperor said the fig was surprisingly wet. A collective gasp. One bishop crosses himself. Another writes down possible omen. Naval flooding? Simeon makes a note on his parchment with a quill shaped like a tiny lyre. Adjust fig moisture content tomorrow. Dismissed. You all stand. Nobody makes eye contact. Nobody breathes too loudly. This is the dark heart of Byzantine administration. Gastric surveillance, disguised as imperial loyalty. But your day's not over. As you walk back out with Stephanus, he mutters, Did you see who was sitting in the corner? You hadn't. You were too busy pretending your body didn't exist. That was Kalonymos, Stephanus hisses. The emperor's new food omens consultant. You blink. He has a food omens guy now, apparently. Claims he can divine fate from pastry flakiness. You sigh. You just got used to the fig protocols. Now there's pastry augury? Historians still argue whether the court truly believed in food-based prophecy or whether this was all elaborate performance to keep certain officials employed. You think it's both. The empire runs on rituals, omens, and a truly baffling tolerance for edible symbolism. You and Stephanus part ways near the bath hole, and you head down toward the intermediary kitchens, the halfway point between the real cooking areas and the public face of the imperial food scene. That's where today's lunch preparations are being staged. You're not in charge of lunch, thank the saints, but your presence is requested for oversight. It's a light meal. Chickpea stew, olive bread, and a fruit plate arranged to look like St. George slaying a dragon made of melon. You inspect the work with the weary eye of someone who once saw a quince ignited by accident. You're about to head out when someone taps your shoulder. It's Alexios, one of the scribes. Short, puffy-eyed, and always 10 steps behind on court. Gossip. He leans in close. Did you hear about the bishop's melon allergy? No, you say, me neither, he says, grinning. But rumor is, he's claiming revelatory throat tightness. Watch your back. You force a smile. This is what passes for office banner in the palace. As the afternoon drags on, you help inspect the water vessels for traces of copper. Bad. Review the bread with the palace leavener, who once declared a loaf spiritually ambiguous, and field a short, whispered question from a visiting courtier about whether figs are permissible during minor feast days if shaped like birds. They are, but only if the beaks face east. You finally return to your quarters in the early evening, exhausted and lightly powdered with flour. Clytus the parrot screeches, "Heresy," from somewhere down the hall. You ignore it. Dinner will happen without you. As always. Instead, you eat a small bowl of cold lentils from your shelf jar, then sit down to write in your secret scroll. Today the fig was too wet. The porridge forward. I remain backward. Clytus swears at icons now. I may join him. You roll it back up, tuck it under your mattress, and lie back. Simon's words echo in your head. We deal in results. Results, you think, would be easier if you didn't have to interpret the gastrointestinal leanings of a divine emperor with a god complex and a cinnamon allergy. But then again, you chose this life. No, wait. You didn't. You were selected, groomed, trained, elevated. And now? Now you just try to survive. You dream in barley. It's not poetic. It's just that barley has wormed its way into your subconscious like a clingy dinner guest. In this dream, you're stuck in an enormous bowl of porridge, and Simeon is there, slowly stirring it with a giant ladle while quoting imperial dietary regulations in Latin. You wake up sweating. It's the middle of the night, or the middle of something. Time is a slippery eel in the palace. Outside your chamber, distant bells toll the vigil hour. Clytus mutters something unintelligible, possibly apostate, possibly apricot. You sit up. The room is dark, except for a thin shaft of torchlight slicing under the door. That can only mean one thing. Someone is coming. A knock. Soft. Urgent. You answer in a whisper. Yes. The door creaks open to reveal Ionikios, a junior clerk whose chief skill is being forgettable in any room. His robes are inside out. His hair looks like it lost a knife fight. He's clearly panicking. They need you in the private kitchens. Right now. You blink. It's the middle of the night. I know, he says, wringing his hands. The emperor can't sleep. He's asked for a reflective snack. Of course he has. Moments later, you're pulling on your oversmock and hustling through shadowed hallways. The palace feels different. At night, softer, stranger. The torches flicker against painted saints who stare down with disapproval. Even the marble seems to echo differently, like it's whispering your steps back to you. The private kitchens are quiet but not still. A single fire glows in the bread oven. A small cluster of senior cooks huddle near the counter. You're greeted by Matrona, the night cook, whose tolerance for drama is roughly the same as your tolerance for nutmeg politics. His Majesty wants something soulful, she says, eyes rolling. And honeyed, but not syrupy. I told him to send a philosopher. You nod and glance at the sparse ingredients laid out. Figs, almonds, rosewater, stale cake from yesterday's banquet, and a small bowl of crushed pistachios. What's the emotional theme of the evening? You ask. She shrugs. He's been writing couplets about exile again. Ah, one of those moods. You and Matrona work quietly. You suggest a sweetened milk custard infused with rose and a hint of cardamom. She toasts the nuts and folds in flecks of honeyed pear. Together, you arrange it on a plate that once belonged to an emperor who died of overeating. Irony is not lost on either of you. By the time the dish is complete, a palace runner is already waiting. You hand off the plate with a murmured prayer to the saints of digestion. Then you and Matrona share the sacred post-snack silence. You think he'll like it? She asks. No, you say, but it won't offend him. She nods. High praise. This, you realize, is one of those Byzantine ironies historians still love to debate. The people who made the empire run were often the people no one noticed. Eunuchs, scribes, night cooks, fig cutters, omen readers. Ghosts in velvet. And yet your smallest failure could spark a theological crisis. As you're cleaning up, Matrona offers you a bite of leftover quince pastry. It tastes like sunlight through a dusty window. You almost cry. It's been that kind of day. You ever think about leaving? She asks. You laugh. To do what? Run a tavern in Antioch? No one wants a tavern run by a eunuch who can recite the dietary sins of St. Basil from memory. She smirks. I would. You pause. It's a strange thing. Being seen. Even for a moment. The next day begins the way all days do, with incense, cold water splashes, and a list of food-related grievances from the imperial valet. But you move through it differently now, slightly less alone, until a courier finds you in the cloister garden with a sealed scroll. It's from Theophanes, the emperor's spiritual advisor. Heavy wax. Smells faintly of frankincense and passive. Aggression. You break the seal. The emperor requests your presence at the midday meal. Privately. No intermediaries. Come prepared to explain last night's custard and your thoughts on the relationship between sweetness and moral clarity. You stare at the scroll. Stephanus finds you 10 minutes later, still holding it like it might explode. He wants a moral. Custard debrief? Stephanus whispers, reading over your shoulder. What does that mean? No idea, you say. But I think I'm about to get theologized. It's not a joke, Dot, because when you arrive at the private luncheon refectory, the emperor is there, wearing a robe so intricately embroidered it could legally qualify as a map. Beside him, Theophanes, 2 scribes, a page holding a spoon, and a small plate of uneaten custard. You bow. You fed my soul, the emperor says without preamble. Now feed my understanding. And just like that, you're discussing the allegorical implications of rosewater, the mystic duality of crushed pistachios, and whether custard is more monophysite or diaphysit in its spiritual consistency. Historians still argue whether this conversation was serious or satire. But you navigate it like a saint walking a tightrope. By the end of the meal, the emperor smiles and waves you off with a single word: resonant. You exhale for the first time in an hour. As you leave, Theophanes catches your sleeve. You have a gift, he murmurs. For flavor profiles? For survival, he says. Use it. And just like that, you're back in the corridor, blinking in the mid-afternoon sunlight. You survived a theological tasting. You have a new reputation. Now, the custard philosopher. It might sound ridiculous, but in Byzantium, it's a promotion. Later that evening, while Clytus the parrot is squawking heretical nougat, from the herb alcove, you sit quietly at your tiny writing shelf, quill in hand, pondering your unexpected elevation to imperial custard consultant. You didn't ask for this role. You didn't train for it. But Byzantium has a way of making odd saints out of odder circumstances. You've been summoned again, this time, not to discuss pudding metaphysics, but to assist with a feast. A large one. Tomorrow. A diplomatic luncheon for envoys from Bulgaria and Kiev and Rus. Which means you, dear eunuch of the breakfast realm, are now part of the Imperial Table Composition Committee. Try saying that 5 times fast after an anise cordial. The committee is a beast. It includes 3 senior clerks, 2 dietary scholars, 1 decorative poet, and, unfortunately, Simeon, all squabbling over the food not as nourishment, but as symbolism. A diplomatic meal is a language, and every fig, every walnut, every suspiciously sculpted loaf of bread is a verb. You arrive at the committee chamber to find the walls covered in parchment sketches of possible dish layouts. There's a near-violent debate happening over whether the trout should be arranged in a star pattern or a spiral, because spirals imply heresy in some Slavic dialects. You make a mental note to never underestimate spirals again. Your job, they tell you, is to supervise the pre-feast morning foods, essentially the pre-lunch nibble offerings for the imperial suite and any early arriving envoys. Think elite. Trail mix, but with more ceremony and fewer raisins. You're also to ensure no ingredient can be misconstrued as a subtle diplomatic insult. You ask for the latest political sensitivities list. It's 6 pages long and includes no garlic. Rus ambassador's brother died in a garlic harvest accident. No cherries, symbol of seasonal imbalance. No sesame. Bulgars apparently see it as food for goats. No boiled eggs, unless pre-cracked and served in 3's long story. Something about a border incident. You sigh, looking down at your original menu draft. The first 3 items now read like a suicide note. You go back to the kitchens, where Matrona is trying to brine almonds without invoking theological despair. She's heard the news too. Who did you offend? She asks. Theophanes called. Me resonant. You reply. She winces. You poor soul. You spend the rest of the day trying to design a morning tray that communicates imperial hospitality without also suggesting our empire believes your kingdom is spiritually inferior. It's harder than it sounds. You settle on rose-scented flatbread, safe. Pomegranate molasses, ambiguous, but pretty. Sliced pears arranged in a Trinitarian triangle. Theologians debated this last year, but the current consensus is favorable. Goat cheese canals, borderline, but you'll blame Quitus if it goes wrong. You also include tiny silver spoons instead of fingers or knives. A gesture of refinement, or possibly cowardice. That night, as you run through the tray order again in your head, you try not to think about how many careers have ended over misinterpreted food. There was that one guy, Anastasios, who dared to serve oysters during a fast and ended up reassigned to a monastery on the edge of the known world, tasked with translating psalms into tree bark etchings. The feast day arrives. Your tray is delivered on time. You accompany it, just in case someone sees an enemy deity in the cheese dot in the imperial audience chamber. There's music playing slow, metallic harp notes, and a singer quietly intoning a liturgical poem about celestial dining etiquette. Yes, that's a real genre. The envoys are seated, grim-faced and suspicious of the cutlery. You present the tray. A page announces, a morning token of grace, composed under the divine guidance of the imperial breakfast steward. That's you. You bow. The Russ envoy pokes the pear triangle with a furrowed brow. His interpreter whispers. Then he nods. Geometrically appropriate. The Bulgar stares at the cheese, takes a sniff, eats it, pauses. You prepare to faint. Then he burps softly, nods, and says, acceptable. You are not executed. In fact, later, the emperor makes a passing comment that the morning offering aligned well with the celestial mood, which is basically a Byzantine way of throwing you a parade. You are, briefly, a legend. Theophane smirks. At you in the hallway, still resonant. You can't tell if he's complimenting you or hexing you. Either way, the rest of the day goes reasonably well. No bloodshed, no poison beats. The decorative poet's bread sculpture holds together, long enough for a prayer and a bow. Simeon tries to claim credit for your tray, but no one believes him because he once confused saffron with shredded parchment. That evening, you and Matrona share a leftover fig tart and speculate on what it all means. You think the Empire actually cares about any of this? She asks. You shrug. Cares no, but it notices. And that's worse. Historians still argue whether the Byzantine obsession with symbolic meals reflected sincere piety or just really elaborate passive aggression. You suspect the answer is yes. You return to your chamber, legs sore, hands raw, but soul oddly buoyed. For a few brief hours, you weren't just a eunuch in charge of eggs and incense. You were the custodian of imperial intention, the arranger of edible diplomacy, the humble spoon behind the throne. Clitus greets you with an enthusiastic screech of heretic soup, and for once, it feels like applause. You're awakened the next morning by a slap of linen to the face. It's the laundry eunuch, which means the day has already betrayed you. He's grumbling about Cletus's feathers being found in the ceremonial napkin folds again. Apparently, parrots are not on the acceptable textile contamination list. You apologize. Again. Then you remember, it's inventory day. That's right. Once every 3 weeks, by order of the imperial chamberlain and enforced with the zeal of a fasting monk, all senior kitchen staff must conduct a full accounting of the imperial breakfast stores. You sigh into your morning water. Basin inventory. Day is less about counting food and more about measuring power. You'll need to document, in meticulous detail, the state of every clove, fig, and egg yolk under your jurisdiction. Then prepare an annotated copy for 3 different departments. two of which will absolutely ignore it until something goes missing, and you're accused of treason --by-nutmeg. By the second hour, your hands are sticky from dates, and your soul is beginning to calcify. 82 preserved lemon slices. You mutter, ticking the scroll. 83, says Stephanus, peering into the jar. You missed one. You sigh. Add a note. Discrepancy due to lemon shrinkage. He nods solemnly. Historians will argue about this one day. They might too. Byzantines kept shockingly detailed kitchen records. Some survive, full of passive-aggressive marginalia, complaints about onion shipments, and one memorable note: suspicious cinnamon received, possibly heretical. You move on to the dry goods chest. Lentils, barley, cinnamon, cloves, dried plums, mystery powder labeled only as blessing dust. You don't question that one. Next. Egg rotation. Eggs are serious business. Freshness, color, and origin are all meticulously tracked. The emperor believes that eggs from black hens bring divine insight, but only on Tuesdays. You lift a crate. Lid and nearly faint. Inside is a basilisk egg. Not literally, of course. It's a goose egg painted gold, part of an old ceremonial tradition no one quite understands. Someone must have tucked it in here during Lent and forgotten. You add it to the uncategorized relics column and try not to think about it again. Then, it's onto the ceremonial jam cabinet. Yes, you have one of those, sealed with wax and decorated with miniature icons of saints who presumably approve of preserved fruit. There's quince, cherry, only for internal use. Remember the Bulgar list. Apricot, and something called Imperial Shadowberry, which smells like violets and regret. Matrona joins you for the final inventory checkpoint, the bread register. There are 4 types: regular loaves, breakfast; blessed loaves, for imperial fasts; loaves shaped like animals, used during specific feasts or elaborate jokes; mystery loaf, category invented for when no one knows what it's supposed to be. Today's mystery loaf is shaped like a reclining bishop with raisins for eyes. Who ordered this? Matrona asks. You check the scroll. It just says, for piety, from below. You both stare at it. I'm not touching it, she says. Later, in your records chamber, really just a glorified pantry with a desk. You attempt to transcribe the entire inventory in the palace's preferred format. Old ecclesiastical bureaucratese. A dialect so bloated and circuitous it makes Latin look breezy. Every item requires triple notation: its location, its intended ritual classification, whether or not projects imperial harmony through taste and texture. This last category is subjective. You end up marking half of the lentils as ambiguous. As you're sealing your scrolls, there's a knock. A runner from the spiritual affairs desk. He hands you a small wax tablet. Theophanes requests a private consultation on the metaphysical appropriateness of pear skins during the upcoming vigil fast. Also, do they still whistle when dried? You resist the urge to scream. Theophanes is, as usual, seated beneath a curtain of incense when you arrive. He's eating a handful of almonds one by one and watching you like a man waiting for a prophecy to bloom. I've been thinking about purity, he says. About surfaces, the skins of fruits. You nod cautiously. There are monks who believe. Pear skins trap deceit, he continues. Others say they represent the veil of worldly vanity. And you want culinary input? You ask. Interpretive, he corrects. Do they taste like temptation or truth? This is your life now. You offer a suggestion. Perhaps pear skins, like robes, gain meaning from their context, whether they adorn an innocent or a schemer. He stares at you. That is resonant. You really wish he'd stop saying that. By the time you escape, the sun is beginning to set. Inventory scrolls are filed, goose eggs are cataloged, and you've just given a theological opinion on fruit peel. You pass the basilisk egg again on your way out and shiver. Something about it feels like a threat. You bump into Simeon in the corridor, who's eating an unpeeled pear with defiance. Just to prove a point, he says, mouth full. You don't ask what the point is. It's not worth it. That night, Clytus repeats a phrase you didn't teach him. Fruit lies. You stare at him. Where did you? He blinks. Resonant. Sleep doesn't come easily. Your mind keeps looping through inventories and skins. And ambiguous lentils. You dream of raisins with eyes. You wake to the sound of the courtyard fountain coughing like it has the plague. Sometimes, it feels like the palace itself is trying to tell you something. You just hope it's not through. Jam. By the time the week rolls over again, you've begun to hear rumors. Not whispers in corridors, but murmurs from spoons and the occasional tremble in the silver dish covers. Something's brewing beyond your morning ginger tea. You're summoned to a hastily convened transitional quiet council, which, in true Byzantine fashion, is neither particularly quiet nor actually transitional. It's held in the blue marble room, where the ceiling depicts a cherub sneezing on Constantinople. You don't ask questions about the topic. The emperor's breakfast habits are to change. Not a little tweak, not less plum syrup, or toasted on one side only. Kind of change. This is a full system revision. Apparently, His Majesty has been advised by his personal astrologer, whose qualifications include dreaming of a horse that turned into an almond, that Dawn Foods must align with celestial temperaments. Translation: your entire morning menu must now be aligned with the planets. You rub your temples. You like the old system. The old system involved eggs. Eggs made sense. Now you're handed a wax tablet with phrases like mercurial chewables, lunar starches, Saturn-approved spreads. Also, avoid Mars-seasoned items during sun ascent hours, which you think might refer to paprika. You're now officially working in astroculinary compliance. Matrona. Here's the news while chopping figs and nearly walks into the grain oven out of sheer protest. Do we at least get a chart? You do. And it's color-coded. There's a crescent moon. Near some lentils. Jupiter hovers beside cinnamon. Venus? Apparently, that's butter, as long as it's turned clockwise. You ask Theophanes, who obviously had a hand in this. He smiles with all the serenity of a man who's never cooked a day in his life. It's not about the food, he tells you. It's about resonance with the firmament. You seriously consider inventing a new kind of breakfast entirely. A planet-neutral porridge. But first, experimentation. Your new morning test menu includes oats soaked in starlight wine, deemed too dreamy. Spiced pear with Venus crumbles, whatever that means. Mercury salt cheese spheres, mathematically shaped. Unpleasantly rubbery. Saturnine chickpea paste, popular with melancholic monks. After a week of trials, the emperor finally samples your Saturn-approved morning cake. He pauses, then announces, "This tastes like Tuesday," which is, you learn, a compliment. You're now locked into the new cycle. Breakfast must change according to planetary movement, and you are the one expected to track this. So you now begin each morning not with a spoon, but with a celestial almanac. There's even a temple scribe who arrives daily to inform you whether Venus is peaking or Mars is sulking. You never know what that means in practice, but you make do. Then comes the eclipse breakfast, a rare lunar event. The emperor insists on a meal that reflects the absence of light and the turning of fate. You're told to make it thematically bleak, but not too depressing. A contradiction only Byzantium could demand with sincerity. You serve black bread soaked in ash syrup, lunar salted olives, and pomegranate seeds arranged in the shape of a collapsing star. Clytus, who's gotten really into this whole motif, squawks, "Emptiness is delicious." As you serve, it is surprisingly well received. Historians still argue whether the shift toward planetary breakfasts was based on genuine belief, or just one more imperial quirk designed to keep courtiers busy and distracted. You believe it's both. One morning, you're summoned not to the emperor, but to his niece, a fiercely devout woman with an unfortunate obsession with culinary penance. She requests a breakfast that expresses spiritual agony with just a hint of pear. You prepare. Bitter greens wilted over scripture ash, honeyless barley crust, pear slices arranged like weeping saints. She eats in total silence, then whispers, "I feel forgiven." You try to leave, but she insists you take a gift, a tiny glass, orb containing a single grape. For when joy returns, she says, you keep it in your pocket, unsure if it's a blessing or a warning. The strain of constant planetary alignment begins to show. Matrona has started baking sarcastically. Her latest loaf is shaped like Mars punching a turnip. Stephanus pretends to read the stars, but he's just drawing increasingly elaborate constellations that spell out phrases like, "I miss cheese." Meanwhile, Simeon claims credit for the astrological system in court, but confuses Mercury the planet with Mercury the element, and nearly poisons a diplomat. You begin to dream in orbital cycles. Your sleep schedule now syncs more closely with lunar transits than sunlight. You get a headache every time Mars retrogrades and your chickpeas curdle. Still, you're surviving. You manage a few wins. A sunrise truce tart earns you a smile. From the Empress. A Venusian butter spiral is requested 3 mornings in a row. But your greatest triumph comes unexpectedly during a storm. Lightning splits the air. The Emperor rises at dawn and demands, "Bring me breakfast." Fit for. Jupiter enraged. You throw together spiced apple discs grilled over juniper, honeyed oak clusters sprinkled with gold dust, toasted pine kernels arranged like lightning bolts, black tea, boiled in silence with a dash of vinegar. He eats, chews, stares out the window at the storm. Tell him, he says to no one in particular, he's been heard. And with that, your Jupiter menu becomes part of the Imperial Archive. That night, Clavis mumbles, "Big angry breakfast. Yum." You finally laugh. In a palace where food must please the stars, the saints, and the emperor's niece all at once. You somehow manage to keep your head attached and your porridge. A line. You may not believe in astrology, but the empire believes in you believing in it. And that's all that matters. Today begins not with the clang of kitchen bells, nor the squawk of Clytus quoting metaphysics, but with something far worse. The arrival of the inspector of harmonious consumption. You'd forgotten about him. He's a seasonal visitor. Some say he's appointed by the emperor. Others say he reports only to the empress's favorite cat. No one knows. His name is Alexius, but everyone just calls him the Spoon. Why? Because he carries one. Always. A long twisted tin spoon said, to detect flavor inconsistencies and moral deviations. You once saw him wave it over a pot of barley and proclaim, "This porridge lies." The pot was later EXORCISED. His job is to audit your entire breakfast operation, not for food safety, that would be far too logical, but for ritual integrity, spiritual geometry, and the vibrational purity of ingredients. In other words, nonsense. Terrifying nonsense. He arrives in a robe made of shimmering fabric that rustles like parchment. The front is embroidered with miniature icons of the 9 celestial fruits. He does not say hello. Instead, he whispers to Matrona, "Have the lentils been singing again?" She blinks. They've been. Mostly quiet. He nods grimly. We'll see. The inspection begins. He paces the kitchen like a Byzantine falcon, sniffing jars and tapping loaves with his spoon. You and your staff follow silently, the way accused heretics might trail behind a particularly theatrical bishop. First stop, the Yoke Archives. These are small clay pots containing the egg yolks, reserved for ceremonial functions. He uncorks one, peers inside, and murmurs, "Too hopeful." You scribble that down. Not that it means anything. The yolks are hopeful now? Next, he moves to the breakfast scrolls. These are daily records, annotated by hand, showing which dish was served, its symbolic alignment, and its effect on the emperor's morning mood. He finds yesterday's entry, Jovian chestnut cakes. Emperor declared breakfast, thunderous but merciful. Alexios snorts. Merciful to whom? He demands. You shrug. Mostly the spoon washers. He doesn't laugh. The staff tries to act normal, but under inspection, everything feels exaggerated. Simeon drops a fig into the vinegar by accident and tries to pass it off as a new Saturn cleanse. Stephanus recites a fake poem to justify the black cumin. Even Clitus gets nervous and starts yelling disharmony. At random intervals, then comes the spoon test. Alexios dips his long, cursed spoon into three things: your oat mash, your fermented pomegranate glaze, and your blessed butter. He places a single drop of each onto a small copper plate. Waits, watches. Nothing happens. That's the problem, he says. You stare at him. Breakfast must speak, he says softly. It must shimmer with intent. He moves on. There's a brief pause while he interrogates the flower chest. He suspects sedition. Then you lead him to the celestial calendar tray, where tomorrow's menu is being plotted by candlelight. He studies your planetary alignments and offers a rare compliment. Your Venus placement is intriguing. You nearly faint, but just as you're beginning to hope for a painless inspection, he arrives at the herb wall. A vast tiled shelf covered in sachets of dried basil, thyme, myrrh, and stranger things like humming mint and crow parsley. He stops before a jar. Who approved this? He asks. You lean closer, It's the marjoram. You squint at the label. There's an old sticker, partially peeled away underneath, in tiny script. Property of the Eastern Great Monks. Return upon MONISE. Oh no, you remember now. Simeon found a crate of oddball herbs near the docks and claimed they were donated by saints. You try to explain, but Alexios holds up a finger. This herb carries unresolved tension. He waves the spoon dramatically. Do you feel it? You do. Mostly in your temples. Still, protocol demands that he complete the 3 questions of dish integrity. He asks you, solemnly, would this dish be eaten by an angel? Does it honor the memory of wheat? Could it be served to a weeping emperor without shame? You manage to answer yes, and possibly, before he nods and marks something inscrutable on his wax tablet. Matrona later confesses. She lied and gave him a spoonful of yesterday's butter. It felt too smug to pass inspection. She explains. You reach the final test, the breakfast trial. Alexios selects one dish completely at random and demands to observe it served, as if to the emperor. He chooses a cinnamon rose custard tart, of course, the one that collapses if looked at wrong. As you plate it, he mutters an incantation under his breath, something about caloric humility. The tart is placed on a silver tray. The ceremonial spoon is laid across it at a precise 42 angle, pointing toward the rising sun. Clitus is instructed to squawk divine balance. On cue. It's ridiculous. It goes perfectly. He stares at the tart, sniffs, takes a single bite, then he smiles. Its despair is elegant. You and Matrona exchange glances. That's the closest thing to a rave review you'll ever get. He leaves shortly afterward, muttering to himself about the loyalty of fennel. You collapse in a flour sack. Clitus hops onto your shoulder and whispers, merciful tart. You think you might cry. The next morning, you receive a sealed tablet bearing Alexius's wax mark. A spoon hovering over a crescent moon dot inside is a single sentence. Breakfast has been judged in alignment. The yolks may continue. It's over. Until next season, anyway. You celebrate by inventing a new pastry, the harmonious spoon puff. It's shaped like his actual spoon, only made of fig paste and roasted almond. The emperor eats one, grins, and asks if the custard is crying again. You nod. It is. You wake to silence. No bells, no yelling, no accusations about treasonous coriander. Clytus isn't even muttering Latin. This can only mean one thing. The emperor has left the palace, off on a state tour inspecting aqueducts, kissing relics, pretending to like foreign cheese. Which means you are now cooking breakfast for the regents, bishops, and various imperial hangers-on who didn't get invited. A smaller group, but somehow more judgmental. The morning begins with an urgent summons. From Domnina, the empress's half-cousin's wet nurse turned political advisor. She wants to discuss the emotional aura of the side dishes. You arrive at her chambers, which smell like spiced wool and panic. I dreamed of beans, she says without greeting. Black ones, floating in rose water. A sign of indigestion, perhaps. You offer she ignores you and demands something called the egg of trust. You know this isn't a real dish, but this is not a real woman. You nod and make a note. Back in the kitchen, Matrona raises an eyebrow. Egg of trust. You shrug. I'm thinking poached. On a slice of sincerity. You settle on a soft-boiled goose egg, delicately peeled, dusted with salt and sweet basil, and serve it in a hollowed pear half. It looks thoughtful, at least thought by. Mid-morning, the temporary royal breakfast has become a three-ring circus. There's Bishop Gregorius, who insists that grapes before bread is spiritually irresponsible. Lady Euphemia demands her fig compote to be less figgy. And young Theodulus, the court's teenage mystic in training, asks if the millet was sung to before boiling. You lie. 3 hymns and a brief chant. He nods, satisfied as you plate the next course, semolina porridge, drizzled with honey and despair. You remember something your predecessor once told you before he retired, was forced into a monastery after an incident involving cursed quince. The problem isn't the emperor. It's the people who think they're almost the emperor. He wasn't wrong, with the monarch away. Everyone wants to play imperial breakfast. They demand food that asserts, reflects, heals, or humbles. Some want it to whisper, others want it to roar. One bishop calls you over and says, "This bread offends my memories." You blink. How? It reminds me of exile. You check your notes. It's rye with dill. Another guest frowns at her pomegranate seeds. These feel emotionally dense. You contemplate hiding in the jam pantry. Still, the breakfast continues. You serve 7 courses to 15 nobles. The egg of trust becomes an unexpected hit. Someone writes a poem about it. Someone else weeps softly while eating it. You don't ask why. Later, during the biscuit interval, a courier arrives bearing a small scroll tied with orange ribbon, the mark of the imperial librarians. Inside, a request for you to appear before the Guild of Harmonious Preservationists. You groan. These are the people who preserve imperial food philosophy, not the food itself. Mind you, that the idea is about food. They hold seminars on topics like garum and the self, or figs and empire building. Apparently, they've been reviewing your breakfast records and have concerns. You appear before them at dusk. The lead librarian is a man named Pelagius, who looks like a melted candle and speaks like he's reciting a hymn through a sieve. We question the thematic consistency, he says. Your menus this month fluctuate between humble wheat and celestial indulgence. What message are you sending? That the emperor likes variety? He frowns. Inconsistent messaging leads to spiritual erosion. Another member clears her throat. What is your butter philosophy? My ... What now? Do you believe it should resist the knife? I think it depends on the room temperature. They nod, make notes, and ask if you've read the ancient treatise De Pain Divino. You lie again. Twice. By the time you're dismissed, your brain feels like pickled barley. You make it back to the kitchen and collapse beside the oven, staring at the glowing coals like they might offer clarity. Matrona slides you a plate. You forgot to eat. It's a small piece of barley cake and a spoonful of quince syrup. You nibble . It's perfect. Simple. No themes. No rituals. Just ... warm.cl.itus lands on your shoulder. Egg of trust. He whispers. You chuckle. Don't push it. That night, you sleep deeply for the first time in days. No dreams of judgmental legumes or vibrating marjoram. Just silence. The Emperor is still gone. And for a moment, everything is bearably human. You wake up to two sounds. The rustling of parchment and Matrona hissing your name like a snake reciting a scandal. He's back. You blink. Who? She stares at you. The Emperor. And his digestion. Right. The breakfast game is officially back on hard mode. By the time you reach the kitchens, it's a flurry of motion and misgiving. Clytus is balancing on a hanging ladle, singing snippets of old funeral hymns. Always a bad sign. Stephanus is weeping over a cracked jar of saffron, whispering, "This is how the last guy went." No one corrects him, because you all remember what happened last time. The pickled plum incident. The Emperor had one, and declared it unfit for a jackal. You spent 3 days explaining to courtiers why jackals probably wouldn't mind. The pickle responsible now lives in a cave and talks to Moss. So yes, everyone's a little tense. The Emperor has returned from tour with a renewed interest in vibrational clarity, which, you later discover, means breakfast must now, with moral direction. What this entails is anyone's guess, but he does hand you a scroll titled, The 7 Textures of Imperial Resolve. You pretend to read it. A lot of it is just adjectives. Still, you have work to do. Today's meal must be both simple and profound, digestible but ideologically firm, like an edible sermon. You choose barley sage cakes, representing humble strength, soft eggs poached in rosewater and vinegar, the duality of empire and piety, pear slices with ash honey, a nod to sweetness, earned through trials, and just a whisper of cheese, young and unrepentant. You present it on the ceremonial tray silver inlaid with lapis lazuli stars, designed to reflect imperial clarity. Clytus performs the obligatory squawk of auspiciousness. Stephanus kneels to bless the tray. Matrona mutters a prayer to Saint Livia of the quiet digestive system. Then, silence. You and your team watch through a tiny slit in the kitchen door. The Emperor eats first. A slow, contemplative bite of barley sage cake. He nods then the egg. He pauses. You whisper to no one, "Please don't explode." He doesn't. He picks up a slice of pear with his fingers that have signed executions and edited war scrolls and smiles. Then, a miracle. He says, simply, "I feel ... aligned." You almost faint. Word spreads. Within minutes, dozens of courtiers appear, hoping to capture whatever edible enlightenment just passed over the Emperor's tongue. You're forced to deploy the emergency biscuit reserves. Clytus is handed a cypress wreath for excellent squawking under pressure. But of course, nothing ever stays calm for long. Just as you begin cleanup, a messenger arrives with news that rattles your flour-caked soul. Tomorrow's breakfast must be served to not just the Emperor, but also the Patriarch of Constantinople and a delegation of Persian astronomer priests. No pressure. Matrona leans on the counter, dazed. What do Persian astronomers eat? Clytus mutters, stars, or lies. You've read the treatises. You know these are not just scientists, but ritual calendarists, men who align every meal with the position of Mercury and the nearest meaningful eclipse. Tomorrow's planetary chart is ... complicated. Saturn in retrograde, Venus glaring, Mars practically doing cartwheels. The dish must, according to the imperial astrologer, offer spiritual bridge work and likely caramelized joy. You stay up late in the kitchens, crafting what will come to be known, briefly, as the bureaucratic celestial compromise platter. It consists of a layered wheat and lentil taran, spiced in alternating quadrants, honeyed yogurt spheres, arranged in the shape of the Gemini twins, a single roasted date, sliced open to reveal a fig, which in turn holds a pomegranate seed, a symbolic nesting doll of planetary ambition. It's absurd. It's genius. It might cause diplomatic clarity, or flatulence. The next morning, the guests arrive robed, bejeweled, slightly jet-lagged. The patriarch raises a spoon with reverence. The lead Persian priest studies the yogurt spheres as if they hold the secrets of planetary motion. And the emperor? He just eats. No commentary, no edict. Just a slow, satisfied nod. When they leave, the court is abuzz. You overhear whispers, a culinary peace treaty, like swallowing a hymn. My third eye burped. The head of the Imperial Archives personally requests your menu be added to the Chronicles of Divine Morning Service. That's never happened. Not even for the guy who invented the cinnamon reliquary roll. You make yourself a small biscuit to celebrate. It falls apart in your hands. Perfect. You sit with Matrona on the kitchen step and breathe. Tomorrow will be chaos again. But for now, the empire is full, and so are you. You're not sure what tips you off first. That strange smell in the hallway, like scorched saffron and wet wool, or the fact that Clytus is nowhere to be found. Either way, you know before the steward says a word, it's fire inspection day. Not a real fire, just a threat of fire. A Byzantine ceremonial farce designed to make sure no one's stashing illegal braziers or improperly storing dry lentils near oil lamps. The inspector, Methodios the Flame-Weary, is a humorless man with eyebrows like scorched parchment and an irrational hatred of wooden spoons. Everything is a hazard, he mutters as he surveys your spice wall. Even optimism. You trail him as he pokes at copper pots with a long pole like they might be booby-trapped. Any open flames after Vespers? Only Clytus, and he's metaphorical. He doesn't laugh. You expected that. The inspection drags on as Methodios questions everything from your coal stack's emotional balance to the velocity of your oven door hinges. You nod, smile, answer obediently, and resist the urge to bludgeon him with a time bundle. Meanwhile, the emperor has had a new inspiration. He wants breakfasts of remembrance. Meals that evoke forgotten moments of childhood, empire building, and theological clarity, which sounds poetic until you realize he means your childhood. As in, he wants you to design dishes that remind him of things from your life, because apparently you are now the empire's memory concierge. You serve warm flatbread wrapped in linen to echo the claws used by street vendors in your home quarter. Mulled plum water, like the kind you drank from cracked cups at the monastery. A single fig, half split, dusted with salt, just like the ones your grandmother stole from the bishop's orchard. The emperor eats slowly. Then he sighs and says, I once had a dream of a river with no banks. Your fig reminded me of that. You decide not to ask what that means. As you return to the kitchens. Methodios is accusing Stephanus of harboring aggressive butter. It's just ... Soft, Stephanus protests. It looks opportunistic. Clytus finally returns, carrying a small charred scroll with his beak. You recognize it as part of the Apicius collection, a Roman culinary text that was last seen smoldering near the basilica's kitchens. You make a mental note to invent a false citation. The day ends in relative quiet until just before sundown, when a eunuch from the Department of Symbolic Gestures arrives. He carries a velvet pouch and a look of bureaucratic doom. "The emperor has named you," he says solemnly, "keeper of the sacred breakfast." There's a scroll, an oath, a ring, and a tiny golden fork. This is a terrible development, because now your breakfasts are no longer just meals. They're rituals, loaded with spiritual weight and political subtext. Each poached egg now carries theological implications. Each slice of bread is a metaphor. You are one burnt oat away from diplomatic collapse. At the induction ceremony, the patriarch reads a blessing over your spice rack. A choir sings something haunting about wheat. Clitus receives a tiny laurel wreath and immediately poops in a brazier. Later, as you stand before the imperial breakfast table, new title, new robes, same old spoon, you realize that, in the strangest way, you've survived. You, a eunuch with egg yolk on your sleeve and anxiety in your kidneys, have navigated an entire imperial bureaucracy using nothing but barley, bravado, and the occasional baked plum. You glance at Matrona, who raises a mug of watered wine. Long live the sacred breakfast. She says clitus burps, which seems about right. The next morning is calm. No inspections, no omens. Just the emperor, chewing thoughtfully on your honey sesame loaf, nodding with something that might be respect. The kitchen smells of cloves, warmth, and something like peace. Just for now. And now, the candles. Gutter low. The pans are scrubbed. The oven's cooling. That last curl of cinnamon steam drifts into the quiet. You made it somehow. Through figs and fire inspectors. Through Clitus's nonsense and saffron shortages. Through ancient texts, misplaced mystics, and theologians asking questions no food should answer. It's strange, isn't it? How something as small as breakfast can hold up an empire? But it does. Bite by bite, morning after morning, you've balanced faith and flavor on a golden fork's edge. You've fed emperors their nostalgia and courtiers their illusions. You've cooked like the world depended on it. Because, in Byzantium, it kinda does. Your hands are tired. Your apron is stained. But your sacred spoon is steady. You lie back, finally, in the warm hush of a kitchen without orders. Outside, Constantinople glows in the moonlight. Domes and spires catching the last silver breath of night. The city sleeps, mostly. And you? You drift now too, with a belly full of borrowed recipes and a heart strangely soothed by the soft, rhythmic clink of a cooling skillet. The empire will want breakfast again tomorrow. But that's for morning, you to worry about. For now, let go. Let the silence steep. Let the night carry you, warm as barley porridge, into dreams.